Hello, this is John from Revit for Interior Designers. I was recently asked how to make a certain material, but the question became, is it used for a rendering or is it used for construction documents or a detail? So ultimately the question became, do I model or do I use a material? Let's have a look at the project in Revit and discuss further.
So I have a student that would like to recreate this type of material in Revit. Now, depending on what it is that you're after, this could be done as an actual 3D model, or it could simply be done as a material applied to the surface of the wall. So if we take a look at that material in closer detail, it looks like this in cross section. So it's some type of a tongue and groove system, and these half rounds here create the body of the wall. So how would we do that in Revit? Well, if I launch Revit here, I've got a sample project set up with a floor and 3 sample walls that I can use to do some testing. And if you want to do it as a 3D model, I can go back to my plan view here, and I've got my line weights turned on. That's why this is so thick. So I'm going to turn off the line weights here, or the TL command, TL, to deactivate. And I can build this as a 3D custom model in Revit using my model in place command. So I can go into components, model in place, and the category this will fall under would be, let's say, casework. Hit OK. I'll just accept the default name. And using my extrude command that lets me draw a profile and plan and give it a height or a thickness, I'm going to go into my drawing palette here, and I'll use the line command and perhaps maybe pick the existing wall line here, maybe offset it, let's say, 1/2 inch for the sake of argument. And if I come into here, I can use a circle perhaps and draw a circle that has let's assume a 2-inch diameter, so a 1-inch radius. Now I'll take this circle and I'll simply move it over to there. And then I will trim this, so I have one object here that I can copy or array across the entire wall to produce that design. So I'm just going to draw some little guidelines here. I will trim these edges with the TR command. I will draw a little line here, and I'm trying to make a profile of that half round with this 1/2 inch piece in the background. So here I'll split the circle, split line command there, split the circle so I can trim this side or TR here to here to cut off half the circle, and the TR command is right there. And I can click on this and this vertical line here, and then I no longer need this guideline. I hit delete on my keyboard. So I've got that object right there. That's what I've built. Here's my TL command. It's really hard to read at this scale, but I can bump this up to 1/2 inch scale, for example, or a 1-inch scale, for example. Maybe not there. Let's see here. 1 inch to a foot, right there. And that thick line is the profile of that object. I can turn that off. So I'm going to accept that. And as it's selected here on my properties, it says that the start is 0, meaning it starts on the floor. And then the height or the end of the extrusion is going to be 8 feet. I drew some 8-foot tall walls by example. So if I go to 3D view, this wall, for example, is a generic wall that is 8 feet tall. So I made that extrusion 8 feet tall. And there's the one. And I can also apply material to this object. I can click on it. I can go to edit type. And you notice here that typically where you can have structure as an option here and choose materials, it's not available for these type of objects because this was a model in place object. It's not a standard, for example, wall type where I have structure here, and under structure I can go to materials. To add materials to these types of custom objects here, I would have to go into edit type note that it's not available there, I would have to go here instead, edit in place. So that's an in-place model I built. Edit in place, click on the object, and then here there's a material category right there. So if I click open there, I can then search for a material that's similar to what I'm after. For example, here is a oak that I have in my library. And if it doesn't exist in your library, you can always just type the word oak or something. For example, here at the bottom, you'll get a bunch of options here for materials that are matching your search results. And you'll notice here, there's several different types of oak. The ones with the exclamation point here are old. And the ones without the exclamation point here are new. And so these have some additional features and benefits when it comes to renderings in Revit. So I hit the up arrow, and I brought that into my project there. And if I click on that and go to appearance, then here you'll see this is the material it's going to use. And there's some other options here to make that material look the way it does. And I'm going to simply accept this. I'll hit OK. And so if I zoom into that quickly and accept it and launch my graphic display realistic, I can see what that one dowel here looks like. And there it is there. So in a south elevation, right, I want to stand in front of this wall from down here somewhere looking up towards it. I can launch my cameras, which are really far away only because the scale here has been changed. Let's bring this back to like a 1/4 inch scale or something. So this elevation here, looking up from this blue line toward that wall, is the south elevation, which is this here. Double click. There's the dowel. So I can then go into my modify tab here. Here's array, and I can simply create an array that copies this multiple times. So here I've got the setup for 2. I'll maybe make it 100, as I don't know exactly how long these walls are going to be. And I will then click on the first one, the edge of the first dowel here on the left side, pick the end of that one, so it's there, and then I'll make 100 copies total across my screen. I'll delete whatever I don't need. And I'll simply escape on my keyboard. And if I go back to my 3D view here, you'll see I've created 100 of these things. Back in plan view, if I simply were to zoom in here and choose one, you'll see that this bar here shows up, this little dimension string with the number 100, which I can then manipulate, make it 150, for example, and I've got another 50 added to the end of the array. For example, there. So I can tweak that number, or obviously I can simply just drag here and just delete what I don't need. If these are in excess copies, I can simply delete those. So clicking on the one, notice that once I manipulated the array, I lost my count. But that's okay, because I can always just simply click the individual ones I need or do not need and erase them. This is now part of an array. That's why the object here says model group array group number 1, and I have no access to its properties. So once you make an array, this is what happens to your projects. Your element here turns into an array group. So if I need to edit it further, I'd have to edit the group. Then you'll notice I can select it, and then I can go to edit in place. You have to be inside of the group to make these kind of changes if you decide to change a material, for example. So I can go into edit group here. Then when I select it a second time, I can then edit this option here for the materials with that library right there. But let's say I want to keep this as is. Accept that. Accept that. And you'll see here it's taken up quite a bit of time to update the array because these type of modeling exercises tend to overcomplicate Revit. So this is not something I would necessarily suggest on any project. Although if it's a smaller project, you can probably get away with it. But as projects get bigger and bigger, these types of options, especially when you have curvilinear objects like this, dramatically add to your file size and the user experience. So I limit how often I do this type of work in Revit to speed things up while I'm using the software. But obviously, if I then launch one of my perspective views, I create a perspective looking dead on the wall. I can simply go to View and Render and take a quick peek. I've got to set it to medium quality. Hit OK, render it. So I will give it a second and see how it turns out. And there you have all the wood members here being copied across the wall. I'm going to stop it. I don't have to wait for this to end. I'm just going to stop, cancel that. I've got another camera set up. It's a perspective view, looking at it along the length of the wall. I'll test that one as well to see what it looks like from this sort of angled view. So, sorry, go back to 3D render, take a quick peek. I'll use medium again. And you can see how that wall is shaping up in this project. The only caveat here is that the materials that are applied to the dowel, at least the first one here, that one there, is copied. So every single dowel looks exactly the same. They're all mimicked here. So you can definitely do it this way if you like. I am going to go back to my plan. I'm going to drag my mouse through these, using my mouse to zoom out and grab them all. Take all those and hit delete. And I'm going to do it a different way this time around, without the 3D modeling. And I'm going to make this black and white. So hit inline view. So you can do the exact same work with materials. So here's a Photoshop file of the material. And if you take this photograph here and make a material out of it, you can apply that material to your wall. And instead of having geometry, which again slows down the user experience in Revit, you have a photograph that you can paint onto a wall. And that is what appears in your rendering. Now, there's a little bit more work you have to do because it's more of a custom pattern. So you might need Photoshop. Now, if you don't have Photoshop, it turns out that a little search on the web came up with this result here. There's something called Photopea, which is an online photo editor, which looks just like Photoshop, it turns out. So if I launch that link, here I can then access my files and do this work on the web instead of in my computer itself with Photoshop installed. So let's give this program a shot. Go to File, Open, and I'm going to find the photograph that we're dealing with here. So there's the photograph there. Hit the little magnifying glass and zoom in a little bit. So I want to take a piece of this photograph and use it as an image from Photoshop into Revit. And because this is very similar to Photoshop, I know they have a crop command right here. Now, unfortunately, this picture isn't great. If I zoom in closer, you can see it's very pixelated. So the image is very small in size. This quality is pretty poor. Here's inches, for example. And ideally, I'd want a better looking photograph where when I zoom in, this type of pixelation doesn't exist. The better the photograph, the better off you are. But let's take this as is. So I'm going to use the crop command. I am going to try to take a piece of this, the very beginning of one of these boards, let's say right about there, and I will try to grab maybe this many here. It's about this point here. And if I double click inside of here, it will crop out this image. Now the rest of these boards I'm leaving out, and only because there's a lot of variance here in terms of the shade and shadow. Some of these are very dark. For example, over here, whereas these are very light, and this change between dark and light, it's gonna get transferred into Revit. And I'd rather have all the boards be more consistent. So I'm going to use this little piece here, double click, that piece there as my sample. And I am going to do a little file save as. And in this case, I'm going to do a file export, a JPEG. And I'm going to make sure to maybe get the highest quality possible. Hit save, and I will save this into a folder on my computer, and I will call this, let's say for example, here, I'll call this port image diffuse. This is typically the name of the materials in computer graphics that serves different purposes. The purpose of this material is to have an image file, which are typically called diffuse files. So I'll call this a JPEG and stick it in my little erase folder there. Okay, so that's been done. So next, I'm going to create what's called a bump map that basically allows me to add a little bit more information to the file in Revit to make a rendering look a little more realistic. And so to do that, I'm going to take this image and I'm going to go to image adjustments and desaturate it to make it a black and white image. Then I'm going to exaggerate the differences between the areas that are white and the areas that are darker, or gray and black, for example. So image adjust levels, and this is called a histogram that shows how much of a certain type of color in the image. So these are your blacks on the far left, these are your grays, and these are your whites. And I'm going to move these over into this field here. And as I move this grayscale in the center, you can see it exaggerates the grays in my image here. So I want to have an image, for example, that has shades of gray and some white areas that are highlighted. So I can use this to perhaps give me a value that looks something like this. I can always go into image adjustments exposure, and I can help exaggerate the differences between the light areas and the darker areas by perhaps cranking up the exposure a little bit, slightly, making the highlights show up better. And I can change the offsets here and make a slight adjustment to the image. Let me accept this. I'm going to go to File, Export, JPEG, 100% quality. I'm going to hit Save. And this one is going to be called, let's call it Porta Image, and this is called usually a bump map. So I'm going to call it Porta Image Bump. Hit Save. Hit Yes. So back in Revit, I need to set up a material that uses those images I just created. So you go into Manage, you go to Materials, and you want to start with a material that is similar to the material that you're trying to create. So, for example, I can simply type wood, and these are the woods that are in my project here, and these are the woods that are in Revit's folders installed on your computer. Your project up here, installed in your computer on Revit, outside of your project. And again, the exclamation point here are the ones that are older materials, and the newer ones that have a little bit better quality are the ones here without the exclamation point here. And I did this already. I have that oak material here from before, which is a newer material. I'm going to click on it, right click, and duplicate it. And I'm going to call this my own. So let me call this John's. So JM Porta. And then here, for example, I might decide to change this as well. So this is the, let's call it simply wood. And immediately when I copy material from this library, I have to go to this menu here and choose that button there. Immediately. That's very, very important. So that's checked, done. That's my new material. And these are the photographs of old material we're using. And I'm going to exchange these with my material. So this has to go. So does this, and so does this image here. So I'm going to click on this here, this wood here, and I'm going to navigate to my folder here. And here, for example, I've got the diffuse map, which is the photograph, and that's going to go here under image, right there. Hit open. And then here under the bump, this image, click on that name, and then launch your folder again. Again, I've saved it in a specific folder on my computer, so I will navigate to that folder, and there's my bump map right there. Double click. This material here is called roughness, which is typically a copy of that, and the grays are exaggerated in Photoshop. So if this material is more white and gray, the material is less shiny. And if this material here, this image here again, was very, very dark, then this material will tend to be really shiny. So if I go into Photoshop and make this really black and exaggerate that option, then you'll get a very shiny material. I'm going to leave this one as is because I might be able to use that texture on top of this wall, and it might create a nice effect, as opposed to having to go into Photoshop and take this image and add some gray to it, for example. So let's keep that and see what happens. I'm going to accept all these settings here, but one thing I have to do is tell Revit how big this picture is. How big is this image? So again, this is the image we created here in Photoshop. Now, if we return to our software, how big is this image in reality? Now, because I'm using a 2-inch size for each of these dowels, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 times 2 is 26 inches. I'm using feet in inches. So 26 inches across. Now, I made the walls 8 feet tall. So let's say it's 26 inches across, 8 feet tall, as an example. So in Revit, I have to add that information into here. This image is 26 inches across and 8 feet tall. And you can't enter these numbers, turn off this little link here. But that's the image size, 2'2" by 8 feet. Same thing happens here. Turn this off. So the sample size is 26 inches, and here it's 8 feet tall. That's how big that image is. And ideally, this should be the same size also. So let's do this again. 26 inches, or whatever measurements you're using. Turn off the link, and 8 feet tall. So now all of these images are exactly the same size in real life. This, and this. So let's see what kind of results we get in Revit using these options. I'm hit apply. Hit OK. Then I am simply going to go to modify, and I'm going to paint the wall. Regardless of what material has been assigned to this wall, I'm going to paint over it. And you can do that with modify, this command here, paint. And then I'll do a general search for my material that starts with JM. And there's my material right there. I'm going to click on it. Now take this little paint tool, and I'm going to click on my wall right there where the surface is highlighted, and click. I'm going to close that. If I want to see my material now, I simply go down to my graphics here and show realistic. And there's my material applied to the wall. So if I'm doing a rendering, let's say my perspective here, dead on, where I'm standing in front of the wall. If I do a quick test here using the render tool, it'll take me a few seconds to launch the rendering here. So let it start its process. So there it is right there. That's from the front. I'm going to stop that. I'm going to launch my other camera, looking at it down here on an angle. Do another render, take a little test. Again, it might be medium quality, which takes a little while to render. You can see how the progress is going. But I can stop it as soon as I see that something's happening here that is to my liking. I'm going to stop that. So far, that seems to be working pretty well. Now, the problem is, in your south elevation of this wall, you have no indication that that wall is a particular material, because there's no hatch pattern assigned to this wall. So let's return to my material here, Manage Materials. Let's find that portal wall here. Notice here under the foreground pattern, so surface pattern, foreground and background are used to show hatch patterns in Revit. Shaded here means the shaded view. Surface patterns here work when the scene here is hidden line. And also shaded, but these are hatch patterns. So if I come into here and choose a pattern, I can find a hatch pattern that's similar to what I'm after, which is maybe a bunch of lines that are vertical and perhaps are 2 inches on center. I can scroll through this list and I can find a hatch pattern that does that. These are called drafting patterns. They do not follow a certain scale. They work based on the current scale of the drawing, but they change. So if the scale went from an eighth or a quarter to an inch and a half, these will subsequently change scale because of the scale change. They will look different per scale. Model means that they measure exactly the size, no matter what scale you're at. So if something is 2 inches wide, it'll stay 2 inches wide. So here, I don't have any vertical boards that are, well, here's some 2-inch board, some lines here, but I don't have any. That's actually 4, that's a 3. So I'm going to take this 3-inch parallel lines, I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to call it John's 2-inch parallel lines. And here, instead of 3 inches, I'm going to say 2 inches. And instead of doing 0 angle, I'm going to type 90 because it's standing, vertical. Hit OK. I got a brand new hatch pattern here called John's 2-inch parallel lines. Oh, that's a typo. So this little pencil here lets me fix typos. So let me fix that. So now that 2-inch parallel lines have been assigned to this material called the portal wall, which again has this photograph when it's being rendered, but it has these graphics in black and white, or shaded view. Shaded view, this is the color it is when it's shaded. Hit OK, hit apply. So there are the lines. So if this is shaded, that's the color of the shade. There's the hatch pattern. Right? If this is consistent colors, again, those are hatch patterns. That's the shade of the wall. If this changed to realistic, the other tab comes into play. Again, it's a tab on the materials called Appearance. This tab influences the appearance. So now you have two methods of applying these dowels to the wall. Now I've simply done it using the paint tool, but I could very simply create a wall type that has this material applied to it and use that elsewhere. For example, maybe there's a bunch of places this wall is being used, and painting it might take too long, or you might simply want to make a wall type that has that material built into it. So I'll take this wall here that's called generic. I will edit type, I will duplicate it, and I will call it, John's Porta wall from the manufacturer's name. I will then go into structure here under the material, and I'll assign the material here. So I'll simply go into there, find the Porta wall, double click, and now it's been assigned to this wall that happens to be 8 inches thick, and it has this material assigned to it. And when I hit OK, then suddenly that material has been assigned to that wall. Now again, because it's a wall, it's going to wrap it over the top and around the back. But maybe it's not a problem because you may not see that ever at the top there. But this material has been assigned to a wall called John's Porta wall. And now when I make a new wall, architecture wall, using my wall type called, let's do a little search for JM. Here's my wall. Click. Once I make another wall with the same name, it looks as such. That wall happens to be 20 feet tall or something. So this wall will transform into John's wall. Again, I can do a little search here for JM, find it quickly. There. And that wall becomes there. this wall happens to be the old wall called generic. You could eliminate this painted wall here. This material is painted on here. You can eliminate that by going back to modify, paint, remove the paint, click. The paint's gone. And you can reapply it using the opposite tools. Or you can simply transform the wall into the same wall that you have over here. Right? Do a search for JM, Porta wall. Now it's the Porta wall. So that wall works in rendering and in black and white. Okay, so those are your choices. You can actually build them in 3D if that's necessary, or use a material and paint the wall and have the wall appear with the material in black and white and in realistic mode. Obviously, because I painted the wall, if I go here in 3D, there is no detail here showing those dowels in plan view. This is the wall in plan view. But that can be handled with a detail. So either you want to see it three-dimensionally here in my floor plan, or you actually just have it appear in a separate detail, which is handled pretty easily. You simply just make a view, a call-out view, and here it says reference other view. You choose that. And we're going to make a new drafting view. And I'm going to draw a little tag around here, a little call-out tag. And I'm going to move that down a little bit. When I double-click on this, it's going to launch a detail. Under drafting views, you see a detail showed up here. So whether I double-click here or I double-click on that, it launches the detail, which is simply a piece of paper. And on this piece of paper, you'll draw your details. Because there's no 3D model that describes the detail, you then have to draw it manually, which is under here, annotate detail lines, and simply use all the drawing tools here and literally draw whatever it is that you're after. So whether this is 2 inches apart, I'll do this quickly, 1/2 inch here, and then here I'll draw a detail line again, maybe draw a start-end arc, start here, end here, pull it out, delete that line. And this is simply like AutoCAD. You simply copy things, you duplicate them. Let's say you want to just make a sample of, just duplicate a couple of these things. Maybe draw some detail lines that describe a little line here that goes up here. Maybe do some trimming, TR. Maybe get rid of that. Maybe add some dimensions. Maybe change the scale, whatever scale you're after, depending on what you're doing. Grab these lines, change the line weights here under line styles. Maybe this is going to be bold. You'll see it bold when you actually launch the line weights right here at the top. Maybe this is a 3-inch scale drawing, if you're using feet and inches at all. But there's a detail. So this, when you double click on this detail here, it launches that. And perhaps you want to include the wall. Again, you can do that as well. You can simply just draw some, just semblance of a wall back here or something, right? Maybe that's the edge of the wall. And you can use text command to add notes and such. You can format your dimensions to get rid of this 0 feet. But again, that's a detail that is referencing the corner of this wall, but you don't have to build it in 3D. You can simply draw it 2-dimensionally. So that's how you would quickly detail that wall, and you have the option of showing it in 3D or not. Now you have a nice material you can use. It's completely up to you. So that's that. Hope this helps. Bye for now.